Warning, this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. What was the scariest/creepiest thing that has ever happened to you? Years ago, I was on a cross-country trip, solo, to a family reunion. I was supposed to make it a friend's house, but there was horrible weather, it was slow moving. Then a terrible accident happened just ahead of me, and I was stuck for quite a while. All told, I was 5 hours behind schedule. I was exhausted, in need of a bathroom and a shower, so I pulled into a little strip motel off of a fairly backroad state road. It was obviously small and dirty, but would work in a pinch. There was a window to the outside where check-in was. The guy there eyed me up, then a college-aged girl asked me if I was traveling alone. I went to hand him my ID and credit card, but he insisted cash only. The room was dirty, barely bigger than a bed. The first thing I did was go to the bathroom, then I flipped up the mattress, dirty, signs of bed bugs. A moment later, I spied a cockroach. That was it, I was out. I decided I would use the parking space at least, and sleep in the back trunk hatch of my SUV. I curled up, using a suitcase for a pillow and random clothes for a blanket, and fell asleep for an hour. I woke up aware of someone talking on a phone outside, and glanced out to see the guy from check-in standing outside. It was now around 3 a.m. He finished up his call, then walked quietly over to my room, unlocked the door, and walked in. I hadn't seen Guy 2 enter, so I still don't know where he came from. They angrily talked for a moment, then check-in guy walked over to my SUV. I covered up my head quickly with a shirt. After he tried the locked door, he peered in the back seat, but between my tinted windows, and blending into the general mess, he didn't notice me in the hatch. The two guys walked away to the far side of the lot, talking more, the one gesturing across the street where a diner was. While they were distracted, I climbed up to the front seat and started up the SUV, they turning around in surprise as I pulled away. I called my friends back home and told them, but didn't want to worry my family, so I said nothing to them. When I got back home some 3 weeks later, we figured out the name of the hotel thanks to Google Maps and called the local police. When I was in university, I had a summer job in the town by my cottage, and spent the summer living there alone. One night at about 11, I was watching TV when an 18-wheel truck pulled into my driveway. Keep in mind this is a pretty isolated area. Instead of hiding, I grabbed a butcher knife, stepped onto the deck and yelled, "What the FCK do you want?" It turns out my neighbor forgot I was living there during the week, no car, bike to work, and told his visiting friend, a long-haul trucker, to park there overnight. This was likely also one of his scariest experiences. I was like 12 in a bathroom stall in Walmart, using the bathroom, and I got this super weird feeling that someone was watching me. I slowly moved my eyes upward and toward the adjacent stall, and there was some old F-ker standing on the toilet, watching me shit. When I was 10 or so, I had an incredibly vivid nightmare that I was being chased through a dark maze by a giant, disembodied hand. I woke up in a cold sweat, shaking all over, but needing to use the bathroom. I mustered my courage to get up and walk to the bathroom, and when I turned on the light, the hand was there waiting for me. I screamed at the top of my lungs and then woke up for real. Turns out I had a false awakening, where you dream that you wake up, thinking I was awake, and finding my nightmare had come true, was mind-numbingly terrifying. Definitely the weirdest thing was the night after my dog was put down. He wasn't allowed on my parents' bed, but sure enough when we left the room, he would jump up and mess with the covers. My dog was put down in the morning pretty suddenly, so my mom didn't get a chance to make her bed. I was in the room when she made the bed and it was perfect. We both left together and watched some TV with my dad, and we were the only three in the house. After whatever we were watching was over, I saw my mom walk down the hallway, and as soon as she saw her bed she screamed. This happened for a couple days right after and then just stopped. My family is completely convinced my dog's ghost hung around for a few days after he died. My best friend and her father dropped me off at my house after school because my parents were still working. As they were driving away, they saw a man who was a lawn care dude sneak behind me from the side of our house while I was unlocking the door with my back turned. I was 14 and so frightened. That's when my innocent child view vanished. I don't know what would have happened if they didn't see him. Nothing supernatural or creepy, but I had a grand mal seizure out of nowhere. Don't have a history of neurological disorders to be clear. Got into my car and started hearing these loud whispers and started getting real dizzy. Didn't know who I was, where I was, or what the hell had happened. And there was blood everywhere. Complete memory loss is absolutely terrifying. I was riding my bike home late one night and coming my way is a big guy with sunglasses on. He gets me to stop and says, "Do you mind if I ask you some questions?" The fact that he said questions weirded me out, so I said, "No, sorry, I have to go," and I started riding away. At the next block there was a red light, so I stopped. I looked back and the guy is running towards me. He is about 20 feet away and I freak out and just go. He got as close as about 5 feet from me before I pulled away. I'm sprinting on my bike and like 3 or 4 blocks away I'm far away and I look back, he's still chasing me. I never pedaled so hard in my life all the way home. Sleep paralysis, that SHT is terrifying. It was my senior year of high school. On a warm May evening I was getting ready for bed when I heard yelling coming from outside. I ignored it until I finally crawled into bed. It wasn't long after I closed my eyes that I heard "I wanna FCKU." Through my open bedroom window, there was my neighbor, standing at the fence that divided our yards, looking up at my open window. I was pretty freaked out, and I contemplated whether or not I should tell my parents. I didn't know him very well. We had never spoken before. I didn't think there was any real reason to make a fuss over it. The next morning I was home alone, getting ready for school. I see my neighbor putzing around in his yard, and we make awkward eye contact through my living room window. I didn't think anything of it. Close to 8:30 that morning, I hear my dog, in our backyard, barking, and it started to sound vicious. I casually thought, "It's just Mom," but in the back of my mind I had a strange feeling it was my neighbor. My gut feeling was right. To this day I am so thankful that I had listened to that small voice in the back of my head. We met up in the kitchen. I'll never forget the look on his face. He looked afraid, almost as if he didn't want to go through with what he was going to do. At the same time, he had this crazy look of lust in his eyes. He said, "Don't move." The only thought going through my head was, "If you want to live, run." I wanted to faint, and I'm so glad that I didn't. As I ran out of the house, I remember screaming, "No! No! No!" I fell down the front stairs leading up to our porch, got up, and I must have knocked on 2 or 3 different houses before someone finally answered their door. My town's entire police force showed up. The guy ended up going back to his house. I guess he was an unsuccessful recovering alcoholic and had drank 2 liters of vodka the night before. He admitted to the police that he had been watching me through my bedroom window for months. The monthly spooky thread. I love these. I love telling this to people. I was living with my sister and her husband in Vegas. It was a 1-bedroom apartment on the top floor of a 3-story complex. One day I was getting ready for work and called my sister because I was looking for nail clippers. Both my sister and her husband had already left for work, so I called her and said if she had any. It was clear and sounded like a young Caucasian male. I am of Mexican descent and my brother-in-law is from South America. So naturally I was confused and looked around. Again, it was a 1-bedroom apartment and it wasn't very big, so it would have been easy to spot an intruder. There it is again. The male asking for help. "Hello, can you help me?" I ask who is there and he just asked for help again. I tell him sorry I can't, I have to go to work, and that's that. Fast forward to the end of my shift and I'm home from work. I tell my sister about someone asking for help and she asks, "Did it sound like a young male?" At first, I thought I had already told her and she was just repeating it to me. My brother-in-law comes home from work 30 minutes later. My sister then asks him, "Guess who Crazy Fox 86 talked to today?" He turns pale and gets a stern loom on his face. "Did the young guy ask you for help?" Now I am freaked out because he had just walked in and immediately knew what had happened. Never heard anything else after that, but it was freaky that they both had experienced the same thing before. A few years ago, I was in a very dark place emotionally. I had these episodes where I would just lay in bed wanting to die. Sometimes, when I was alone, I would verbalize my feelings, cry out loud, etc. It was really pathetic, but it made me feel better. Creepiest thing happened during one of these episodes. I was laying on my bed in my pitch-black bedroom. My husband was away for work for a month, so I was feeling very alone and abandoned. Not at all the case at the time, but like I said, dark place. I heard something start to move around in the corner of the room. Something big, like a person taking a few steps in place, floor creaking, shuffling. Instant terror. The sound only stopped when I threw the blankets over my head and begged to be left alone. I have no idea what it was and I don't ever want to know, but I am now very careful what I wish for. I was about 10 years old and I was in bed sleeping and get woken up by a noise on the street. It was about 1:30 a.m. so everyone was sleeping and the street was empty. The street in front of the house was a two-way street separated by an area of grass and plants. It drove past my house, stopped, reversed really slowly. The passenger turned on a high-powered flashlight and shone the light into every window. Drove slowly forward again, still shining the light. When the truck passed our house they turned the light off and waited. Probably not the scariest/creepiest, but something reminded me of it today. I have a mate who lives about 90 minutes north of me, and he comes down to spend the weekend at our place every couple of weeks. We do a thing on Friday night up his way, and then drive back to my place together at about 1 a.m. One Friday night we're driving down the bypass to the highway, and he suddenly startles in his seat and comments, "For a second, I thought we both died and we'd be driving down the bypass forever." Well, that's a f***ing morbid thought, but I just laugh and tell him that it would suck to be driving down a bypass for all of eternity. We dropped the subject not long after, and by this point we've turned onto the highway. About 10 minutes later, I go over this crest on the road, and have to slam on the brakes, because there's a man that has just jumped out onto the road directly into the path of my car. I look in my rearview mirror to see what he's doing, preparing to speculate on it. I think I started to say something like, "Wouldn't it be creepy if you just disappeared," and then realized that he'd just gotten into a car and started driving. He put his indicator on as though he was going to take the same exit, and then he pulled into the other lane instead and sped away. I don't know what was going on and it was probably not nearly as spooky as it seemed to be at like 1:30 a.m. But I didn't sleep well that night. Sometimes when I'm going to sleep, I like to keep track of how weird my thoughts get right before actually falling asleep. Usually within a few minutes before I conk out, my thoughts are just a bunch of non sequiturs, stuff that doesn't make sense, but it is fun to sort of listen in. A year ago I was going through a pretty bad time. My girlfriend dumped me for another guy, work was terribly stressful, and I only found a new apartment a couple days before my lease was up and I had to move out. I was falling asleep and paying attention to how weird my thoughts were getting. Nothing too strange, just a bunch of random thoughts and phrases popping through my head, when all of a sudden, clear as a bell, I heard what sounded like a voice just a few feet away from me. "OFCK, he can hear us," in a flat monotone. I snapped up, and of course there was nobody there. It was just a creepy auditory hallucination, but it felt absolutely real for a few seconds, made all the worse by how strange my own home felt at that moment. I'm on mobile, so sorry for any mistakes. I used to babysit at this really nice house that was about a 30-minute drive from the nearest town. About 15 of those miles were on random gravel roads, so it was pretty isolated. A well-known billionaire in the community built the house when he started making his money. Later on in life, as his health was declining, he began to regret that. It was too late though, as he had burned bridges with most of his children. I only know this because my dad employed his mentally challenged daughter, and had became close with his wife. Anyway, he died and he was haunting the house he built. I was at this house at least a couple times a week, and really freaky stuff started happening as soon as he died. The dog, who was normally a pretty chill, refused to come inside for weeks and would just run around the house in a panic. He'd stand outside the window of an empty room and just bark and growl like crazy. The two started saying that he was scared all the time, and would get up in the middle of the night to check on his baby brother. He had never done that before. There were two things that really scared me though. It was really late, probably 2 a.m., and the phone started ringing, but not in the normal way. Like it was a constant ring instead of a ring and then a pause. The screen on the phone didn't change either. It didn't register that there was an incoming call at all. It just kept displaying the time and number of missed calls. I had to go and manually turn the ringer volume off on each phone so it wouldn't wake the boys up. When the first paranormal movie came out, I was still living with my mom. I saw it with my then boyfriend and was terrified. Later that night, I was in bed. I tossed and turned for about an hour, too freaked out to sleep. Every little noise in the house got my heart thumping. When I actually began to fade out, I heard something in the kitchen at the other end of the house. Then footsteps down the hall getting closer to me. Like someone was sliding their hand along the wall. 2 seconds away from wetting myself, and my bedroom door opens. I screamed bloody murder. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.